Welcome to Wine with Bill, and I'm Bill. Today's guest is someone who's been on the show previously. This is his third time. Third's the charm. He is someone who is beyond informative, educational, inspiring, and just does it all. So, Ryan Smith, welcome back.
So happy to be here, Bill. Happy to be in this new studio, and apologies to everybody out there that has to see me visually now instead of just hearing my voice.
We had you on the podcast format. Now we're all live. But before we get started with some topics, let's go over, we've got your name up here for Ryan Smith, Enoteca Direct, and then is it Ancora Vino?
Ancora Vino,
so
yes.
Explain to me what the new logo is or signage, or what's the significance?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little confusing, we know, and our aim with this name change is to clear up some of that confusion. So nothing is changing. It's all the same people, the same concept, same business, same wines. We're just changing the name. You know, when we built Enoteca Direct up in starting in like June 2020, we did it in maybe 2 months from start to finish, and didn't really have a great idea for a creative name, so we named it Enoteca Direct to tie into Enoteca La Storia, our wine bar and restaurant that's been here since 2010. And that's worked well for us, but it is confusing to have two places called Enoteca on the same street, and we really wanted to differentiate ourselves between our restaurant and our retail space. So Ancora Vino is, an Italian phrase. Ancora means another. Okay. If you were in Italy and you wanted to have another glass of wine, you would say Ancora Vino.
Well, that's the phrase, the magic words.
Yeah. And so, that's kind of the spirit that we're all about. Just having fun, being out there, having another glass because you're enjoying everything so much.
But to get on your website, will it say Enoteca Direct, or will there be a change on that?
No, it'll change. And as of now, we're still Enoteca Direct, but by the time this airs, we'll have fully switched over into Ancora Vino.
Okay. Well,
but you could still, you'll be redirected if you visit any of the old sites or anything.
Well, good. Yeah. Good. Well, good to know, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, let's get down to business here. These questions were asked to ask me, to ask you, from our viewers and listeners. And so let's put it this way. This is not a test, but I know that you will pass with flying colors. There's been a lot of talk about, and I know you have a lot of international European wines at your store, which is, as well as local, but that's great. And we've had people on the show, vintners, winemakers, owners, others, that talk about old world wine versus new world wine. Give me a brief summary of what are the distinctions. Is it a style, philosophy? Is it a technique of how you grow the grapes, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is a question that I get a lot. And there are two different answers to that question. So there is a division between the old world and the new world just in terms of history. So the old world are your classic wine producing countries: Spain, Italy, France, Germany. New world countries are countries that were, the wine business was settled and initiated later, like the United States, New Zealand, Australia, that didn't have, historical native wine production at any sort of scale. So there is that dichotomy between just history, like these countries started their winemaking tradition later, they're the new world, and these countries started their winemaking tradition much earlier, the Greek, Roman, Etruscan times, and they're considered old world. Now, you do also hear new world style, old world style, and in general, what that means, and this is not a catch-all. There are lots of wines that don't fall into either of these categories. Wines from the old world, first of all, the climate tends to be cooler in those places. You get less ripe fruit. You get lower alcohol wines. Because you're getting less ripeness, the climate is cooler, you're not getting as much development of the sugars and the fruit flavors in the wine, so the wines tend to be a little more savory, more spicy, maybe what we call earthy or minerally rather than the big fruit flavors. And then the old world wines are also generally made in a more traditional historical style, which encapsulates many different winemaking techniques depending on what region you're in, but generally it's lower use of new oak barrels, because historically, hundreds of years ago, they wouldn't have made a new oak barrel every time that they wanted to age a wine. That just would have been out of the question. So seeing more cement tanks, neutral wood fermentation, and so in the flavor of the wine, you'll get less of that oak influence that you would typically get in California or, Australia or whatnot. Now, there are wines from everywhere in the world that are being made in vastly different styles, wines from the same place. And so you'll often hear old world style versus new world style. And when you hear that, no matter where the wine comes from, if someone says, oh, this is an old world style wine, generally that means it's going to be less ripe, lighter in body, lower in alcohol, not as fruit forward, so more on that savory, earthy, minerally side of things, and less oak treatment on the wines. And New Worlds would be vice versa. New World wines would be vice versa.
You're an expert on this, but Burgundy in France or in Europe is that our Pinot Noir here? And our Chardonnay or whatever, what is it in France, or what do they call it over there?
Sure. So, many of the grape varieties that we see here in California are grown all over the world. We don't have too many native vinifera varietals to the United States. Most of them were brought at some time from somewhere in the old country in Europe. And yeah, so, it's confusing if you're not super well versed in these wine styles, because wine lovers like you are, like I am, we just kind of know through osmosis of many years that somebody says Burgundy, you say, oh, that's Pinot Noir, right? Or Chardonnay, right? Whereas here in California, the wines are almost always labeled with their varietal name. And so there are, that's a great example of like old world versus new world style. So your classic old world white Burgundy, which is made from the exact same grape Chardonnay that is grown here all over California. In general, those wines are going to taste so much different than the wines, from, say, Napa, like a Napa Chardonnay, or something, at the extreme end, like a Rombauer Chardonnay that's so big and rich, has all that oak on it. And so, there are grape varieties that fit into both old world and new world, and that's why it's a useful
They're
designation.
Fairly uniform, yeah.
Totally. So, I have many people that love Chardonnay, right? But they like crisp, clean, mineral-driven Chardonnays rather than rich, full-bodied Chardonnays. And so for them, it is totally useful to know, oh, I like an old world style Chardonnay, or I like an unoaked Chardonnay, or I like a new world wine. Same with red wines, Pinot Noirs, Burgundies. There are areas in Burgundy that are roughly the same climate as what we get here in California, but the wines are just so different. They tend to be, again, lighter, lower in alcohol, higher in acid, more tart and tangy. That's, in general. However, again, there are winemakers all over California, and especially here in our home region, the Santa Cruz Mountains, that make what we would consider old world style wines from these same varietals. You'll also hear it a lot up in like Amador County, where they're trying to make old world wines out of, traditional varietals, things like Barbera that you don't see in California as much, or aren't considered your classic, American grape varieties. And you'll also hear many winemakers saying, oh, I'm trying to make an old world meets new world style, using old world sensibilities. But of course, if you're in the new world, the fruit is from the new world.
Kind of a combo, hybrid, whatever, yeah.
Yeah, which is, in my opinion, probably the way wine should be. I mean, make the wine however you want, but the wine's going to turn out as a consequence of your winemaking, and then, of course, of the quality and characteristics of the fruit.
Well, thank you for the clarity. You've raised a very good educational point, which is they're the same darn grapes, but they're going to taste completely different for a variety of reasons. Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And, that's the beauty of wine. You can find a grape that has a flavor profile you like, but depending on where it's grown, how it's picked, how it's made into wine, how it's cellared, you can get so many different expressions of the same grape. That it's just fun. It's just really fun, especially something like Pinot Noir or Chardonnay that is widely planted all over the world. There's just so many wild flavor and structural.
A whole rainbow.
Everything is so different, even though it is made from the same grape.
Interesting. Well, while we're talking about European wines and old world, you had a business trip, and I know it was all business the last year, and you went to Italy and its surrounding countries, and I asked you to bring some samples of, I'm going to call it at least maybe newly discovered for you, maybe newly discovered for our viewers and listeners. So walk us through what you brought here and what just was the hook that got you so saying, well, this is really a winner. I'm going to bring it back to my shop, and I want to educate people about it.
Absolutely. So, people always ask me, you must get to travel so much. And in reality, I don't. The wine comes to me and I taste it at a table in the back of my shop in Los Gatos. So it's pretty rare when I can get the opportunity to actually get out of the country for a few weeks and get out there. So I was really excited. I spent a week in Sicily and then a week in Verona. There's a giant wine conference in Verona, and I got to meet all my producers that I know from all over Italy. But the week in Sicily was incredible. And Sicily is... you want to talk about somewhere old world versus new world. Sicily is definitely in the old world,
In capital letters, yeah.
Absolutely. And so different from the rest of Italy. Most of us who have been to Italy have been to Rome, have been to Florence, maybe Tuscany, maybe Milan. Sicily is so much different than that. It's so much older. It's so much more rural and agricultural. The culture is totally different. The weather is totally different. It felt like a entirely different atmosphere, and we basically circumnavigated the island in 7 days and visited all of the major wine-producing regions and some really, really incredible wines from some very amazing small producers that I brought here today. So actually, I started my trip in Etna, which is the most famous wine region in Sicily, and also the most expensive wines from Sicily, the most sought-after wines in the country. And we're in eastern Sicily here, and it's on the slopes of Mount Etna, which is an active volcano. And Etna was smoking while I was up there.
Wow.
It's pretty wild. You kind of there are vineyards all around the volcano cone, and there are just insane, huge lava fields there. And the vineyards are just this crushed volcanic pumice rock. It's very cool. The higher you go up into an elevation, the cooler you get. And they just make these incredible wines called, Etna Bianco and Etna Rosso. So Girolamo Russo is a fantastic producer, very naturally made, organically grown, hand harvested, fermented with native yeasts, bottled, unfined, unfiltered, about as minimalist as you can get in the winemaking style. And it's a grape called Nerello Mascalese, which is considered to be the great red grape of Sicily. And this is a wonderful wine for fans of Pinot Noir, fans of Nebbiolo. It's light in body, light in color, really intense in flavor with these kind of like tart cranberry blood orange things going on, smoke and acidity and tannin, and a long mineral finish that's reminds you of volcanic pumice rock.
Wow.
And it's an intense wine. This is not a wine that I would say get home from a hard day at work and have a glass of by itself. This is a wine, because of that intense tannin and acidity,
But is it food friendly?
It needs food to show it off
Okay.
the best. So, you could have this with just about anything. I mean, pasta, truffles, meat dishes, like roast chicken, pizza. It's really, really food friendly, and a delicious wine, and probably the most historic wine style of Sicily. And I do highly recommend going to Etna if you do visit Sicily, just because it is such a stunning landscape, being in these little tiny mountain towns with the volcano in the background.
Its terroir sounds amazing.
It really is. It really is. So some pretty special stuff. These wines are also really long-lived. One of the cool things about Sicily is that because it's an island and because so much of it is volcanic or sandy, there are many, many old vines on the island. You've probably heard of the phylloxera crisis, which killed off vines in Europe and in the United States over the last century and a half. That's caused by a louse that lives in dirt and eats the vine, poisons the vine. And since Sicily doesn't have much dirt in its soil, the louse doesn't really have a place to live there. And because it's an island, it was harder for it to get there. So there are many, many old pockets of vines, some of them over 100 years old, on Etna specifically and in Sicily in general. So you get some really concentrated, crazy wines out of these
now,
very
where is
old
the next
vines.
one from? Is it the same area or slightly different? Or?
So this is actually on the other side of the island. So we're going from eastern Sicily over to kind of northwestern Sicily near Palermo, which is one of the main cities, and Alcamo, which is one of the main agricultural regions. And this is a wonderful wine made by a small business that's a partnership between an American woman named KCAT Stratton and an Italian winemaker named Vito Loria, and they were my guides throughout Sicily. Kat was born in California, but lived in Italy, didn't want to leave. I had many Italians tell me that she's the only person they've ever met that speaks Italian without an accent that's not Italian. And their idea is these wines are all made from historic, indigenous grape varieties to Sicily. They're all single varietal wines, so there's no blends. They're all made in concrete, so there's no oak. Again, we talked about old world winemaking. There's no oak to mask up the pure flavors of the fruit. They're bottled unfined, unfiltered with minimal sulfur, and just clean, pure expressions of these different grapes. And they make a wine for 5 of the major grapes of Sicily. This one particularly is from a grape called Frappato, recently made famous by Arianna Occhipinti on Stanley Tucci's show in Sicily.
That's right.
A wonderful grape variety. Now, this is absolutely a wine that I could have a whole glass of without something to eat. It's soft and smooth.
On its own. Okay.
Lighter in body, kind of like a Pinot Noir. Still a really great food wine for people that are fans of actually our local Santa Cruz Mountains Pinots. This is another great wine and a fantastic value. It's much less expensive than most Californian wines. And all of their labels as well have these traditional Sicilian marionette puppets, which you see all over Sicily.
Yeah, it's just the artwork and signage, whatever. Well, we're going to take a quick break and come back to Sicily, I guarantee you, as well as some other topics. Having a great conversation here with Ryan Smith, and we'll be back in just a second.
Thank you to the Los Gatos Community Foundation for their continued support of KCAT Public Media. Because of groups like the Los Gatos Community Foundation, KCAT has been able to inspire, educate, entertain, and inform our community through the magic of television and digital media for over 38 years. Thank you.
All right, we're back, and we're back in Sicily, kind of, sort of. So tell us about this one here, Ryan, that's in the middle.
Okay, so this is a really special bottle made by a young man named Niccolo Grappaldi. He's making wine on his ancestral land in Enna, which is in the geographical center of the island, one of the few wine-growing regions that's not towards the coast. It's a medieval kind of mountaintop city. In the medieval era, it was covered with grapevines, but they all died out and none were replaced. So Niccolo actually hand-planted all of his vines on his grandfather's property by himself. He's the only wine grower in this area. He does everything by himself, by hand, totally naturally, and makes maybe 500 cases of wine a year. These are really starting to get some press and become, sought after by like the elite of the wine lovers. They're considered some of the best wines of Sicily, some of the most unusual wines out there, really, really long-lived again.
Sounds expensive.
They are quite expensive. They are some of the most expensive wines I've seen out of Sicily. And I can tell you that when I met Niccolo, I met him in Etna at the Contrada di Etna, which is a big wine festival there. And even though he wasn't from Etna, all the other winemakers wanted to talk to him and taste his wines. His table was so popular because everybody had heard what this guy was doing out there. All of the bottles are hand numbered. Like I said, they're quite expensive. They're in the triple digits. But whenever I pour them for people can't believe what they're smelling and tasting in the glass. There's just so much complexity there. And this is a little more full-bodied than the other wines we've talked about. And definitely, again, a food wine as of now, because the wine needs a little bit of time to kind of tame down that intense tannin and acid. And then the last bottle, this is a really cool story. This is another young guy I met.
Great label.
Yeah, Colodro Caruana. And Colodro is a young man in his early 30s, just graduated from wine school, and had done some, stages with some famous wineries in Tuscany and in Piedmont. And I met him. He's in Agrigento, so kind of near the temple of the Valley of the Temples, one of the big tourist spots in Sicily. And they said, we're going to go to Colodro's winery and taste, and we'll be the first people to go visit his winery. It turns out that his winery is the garage of his parents' house that they've converted into a temperature and humidity controlled unit. And again, he's farming vines that he's planted himself on his family's ancestral lands above the town of Montalegro in Agrigento. And there are no other vines in sight. This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to, and it's in a wildlife refuge. And again,
what's the terrain like? Once again, is it hilly or?
It's very hilly, yeah.
Okay.
So it's rolling. It's not big, steep cliffs, but it's rolling. Lots of elevation change. Very close to the ocean. He's like 5 miles from the ocean, these vineyards, so you get a lot of cooling influence. The other neat thing about this vineyard is that, if you've driven through Napa, you see these pristine rows of vines just going past, mile after mile after mile. These were pretty wild, small vineyards, obviously planted by hand and overflowing with wild herbs, sage, rosemary, flowers, just everywhere in the vineyards. When you stand there, you just get this incredible
which makes its way
aroma.
into the wine taste.
Absolutely, because this is a totally natural wine. So all of those essential oils, pheromone compounds, anything that's in there, that's in any of these plants that we smell, that's landing on the skin and the fruit. And they don't wash the fruit off before they make the wine. So all of that stuff is making its way into the wine. He makes this, again, totally naturally, long skin contact, no sulfur additions, totally biodynamic farming. This is what we would consider an orange wine, which is very popular in Sicily, and we're starting to hear a lot more about it here in the States. Basically a white wine that has had some time on the skins of the grapes to get some color and some texture, almost like a red wine. A little more full-bodied. Again, not a wine that I would necessarily drink by itself, but when you pair it, like we did, Colodro's parents made us a 12-course lunch at their house after we tasted with him, and they served this wine with fresh sardine fillets that were rolled in breadcrumbs and then skewered and roasted over a wood fire, and you have this umami, salty bomb of the fish with this kind of wine. It was one of the best pairings I've ever had in my entire life.
Between you and Rick Steves, I feel like I've gone to Sicily here.
Well, Sicily is the hot place right now. It's been popular on TV, and I'm starting to see a lot more tourism, and I want to go back. I mean, I highly recommend anybody that's thinking about taking a trip there, please do, and please reach out to me so that I can set you up with some of these wonderful wineries and winemakers.
Thank you for that offer. Wow. Well, let's change direction here. The viewers want to know about a subject that is, I don't know if it's perplexing, but they want to do it right. It's called how to store your wine. Not after you've opened it, but before you open it. And it's everything from the closet to they've taken over the bomb shelter, or they've got a wine room that's got 1,000 bottles or whatever. And I believe Laura Ness as I do, and she was on the show, and she said, if you are buying and drinking wine that costs over $50 a bottle, you need to have a wine refrigerator. So walk us through what are the things we should look for. I know that I have I'm going to call it a do-it-yourself. I have 72 bottles capacity, but it's in the basement, okay, and it's it's decent, and the humidity level's good as the temperature. But some of the people say, "Oh, I just want to have 30 bottles," or I want. So what are the factors? And if you have recommendations, please give them.
Yeah, and this is a question that I get all the time, Bill. People asking me, how do I store my wine? Is it worth it buying a wine fridge? What companies are good? And I do agree with Laura. I mean, I guess with one caveat. It's not about how much you're spending on the wine. It's about how much wine you're buying and when you plan to drink it. So,
That's your criteria.
Yeah, if you're buying, you go to the shop every week and you buy a couple bottles and you drink those and you have maybe like 10 bottles at home. If you're not storing those for a really long period of time or for a special occasion, then it's not really that much to worry about. But if you're a member of wine clubs, or if you like to go and purchase a bunch of stuff and you have a cellar and you're going to be storing these wines for more than a year, 6 months, a year, then it absolutely pays dividends to have proper wine storage, or at least as good as you can get. And what you want to do with wine storage is you're looking to minimize a few things. You're looking to minimize temperature fluctuation.
You're on a constant temperature.
Constant temperature.
Which is what? Ballpark? What's the
anywhere
range?
from 50 to 55 is usually what people do.
Okay.
Vibration, which is one of the reasons why real wine fridges cost so much money, is because they use a totally different cooling mechanism than your average refrigerator, because they need to minimize that vibration. Exposure to UV light, and that's like humidity is the other big thing. You want to keep it, especially for long-term storage, you need the environment to be humid enough that the cork's not going to dry out and fail.
Right, it doesn't shrink.
Yeah, or literally just dry out and crumble, right? And so the best way to do that, and what, like, say, champagne houses do, is they have underground chalk cellars that never vary, 0.2 of a degree over the course of 50 years. Now, that's not available to all of us. Most of us don't have even basements here in California, and so wine fridges are important. Now, wine fridges are very expensive, and I do say to everybody, don't go for the cheapest brand out there. You know, there are many brands out there that, you know, it'd be $400, $500, $800, $1,000 for a 120 bottle wine cooler, and you may think, wow, that's a lot of money. But in my experience, a lot of these lesser expensive models, the compressor might blow out after a year or two, and you can't just straight swap the compressors. In my experience, it's very hard to find somebody that works on these.
You have to just get a whole new
You have to get a whole new fridge.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a few problems with that. One, you don't want to be spending $1,000 on a fridge and replacing it every couple years. Second, you don't want your fridge to fail. If you're on vacation in the summer and it's 90 degrees outside, all your wine that you've been storing for years could fail. So investing is really important. And there are some great brands out there. I mean, I think Vinotemp's higher-end models are really good. Eurocave is the gold standard by which everybody operates. Those are outrageously expensive, but really, really wonderful. Me, myself, I have an old... like 1980s era big wooden insulated box with an old drop-in Vinotemp cooler, and that works just fine. I would say, you know, if you're looking to buy a fridge as well, you definitely want to buy bigger than you think you need, because people always fill their fridges up immediately. They see all these empty spaces, they think I got to go buy wine to fill it up, and they fill up their capacity immediately. If you don't have the budget to buy a dedicated wine fridge, there are a few options. One, you can rent offsite storage. There are many different offsite storage facilities where you can rent for, you know, as little as $30 a month, $50 a month if you're only storing, you know, less than, I don't know what the current pricing is, but if you're only storing a little bit of wine. And, you know, you think a solid wine fridge might cost you $2,000, $2,500. So, you know, think about how long that would take to pay back. And how much wine you have. And there are many, like here in Los Gatos, there are a couple of really high quality storage facilities. Like Store at Los Gatos has a whole fine wine division where you can get your shipments sent straight there, and it's guaranteed and, you know, insured and all that.
It's not in your own house.
That is the problem.
It might be a convenience factor, but it might solve a financial issue, so to speak.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you really have a lot of wine, what I recommend doing, if you can't have a full cellar for everything, have some offsite storage and then have a smaller wine fridge that you can move stuff in and out of. But it does take some effort and work.
Well, that's a good hybrid. Have the storage offsite, and then you have, say, a 36 bottle wine fridge where you could keep it filled or almost filled. Yeah.
And I will say the wine fridge as well is really important for long-term aging of the wine. So if you're going to be aging something for 5+ years, it is important to have it in the proper environment, right? But you know, you have a case, like say you have offsite storage or whatnot, you bring a case of wine home that you're going to drink over the next month or so, perfectly fine to leave that out as long as your house isn't 95 degrees inside and you don't leave it in the sunlight. You know, the low cool temperatures will allow that wine to micro-oxidize inside the bottle. That's what we call aging. It's like interacting with the small amount of oxygen that's trapped in the bottle. And the cooler it is, the longer and slower that aging, that oxidation.
Heat speeds everything up, which is not
heat
necessarily
speeds everything
good.
up, exactly. So, you know, basically my advice is if you're looking to buy a wine fridge, 1, buy bigger than you think you'll need, and 2, don't skimp out, right? Go with one of the good brands that has a good, and I would definitely recommend a warranty policy on it.
And are these online, Costco? What's the best platforms or whatever to use?
I haven't seen any of the really high quality ones at Costco or any of the in-store places. You can buy directly from the manufacturers. And then also like Wine Enthusiast, the magazine, has built a big business off of selling especially like wine fridges and glassware and stuff like that. So they have a whole side of their business that
they have a special niche for that.
Yeah, they're one of the biggest sellers of wine fridges, I think, out there.
Well, good.
But it is pretty hard to find. I mean, I recently had to fix my compressor, and I had to call 20 different people before I found someone that would work on it. It's certainly a niche market and niche skill.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why you want something that's going to work really, really well and not give you any problems. And I know people that have had these Euro caves for 30 plus years running, and they're working just fine. I mean, mine's from the 80s, so it's great. Now, if you don't have the budget to buy wine storage, if not all is lost, I would say don't buy a ton of wine that you're planning on saving for more than a few years, because just buy it as you go if you're going to be doing that. Don't worry about stuff that you're going to drink in the next year or whatnot. But if you're going to buying Bordeaux futures to lay down, that needs a proper aging environment. But again, we want to go back to what I said earlier about the enemies of wine, right? It's temperature fluctuation, vibration, UV light, and lack of humidity. So what you want to do is find somewhere in your house that you can store these bottles of wine that will minimize all of that. So many people think, I'll put it in the kitchen. Well, the kitchen's not a good place, because you got usually kitchens are very well lit with natural light, and you have a bunch of vibrating machines. You got a fridge that's running and vibrating all the time. A lot of people will put it in the laundry room, because the laundry room is usually an interior room in the house. But again, you've got the dryer and the washer, and you've got all these temperature fluctuations going on in the room. So in general, I say find a closet or something that you're not going to open very often. It's set against an interior wall, and just store your wine in there. And that's probably the best thing you can do. And just pull out a couple bottles as you need them, as you need to drink them. And then the other big thing is don't feel bad about that, right? Like, don't feel guilty about that. It's perfectly fine. You don't have to have a huge fancy wine fridge to be a lover of wine or a collector of wine.
You have pumped me up here. You've given me some self-esteem and optimism and hope. Well, good. Well, let's focus on what's kind of around us here where we are. I know you're a very strong advocate of local wine. You have a very significant section in your wine store from the local Santa Cruz Mountains AVA. Give us a few of the wineries that maybe are up and coming, and people that are not in the mainstream yet, but you highly recommend either direct buying at the winery or wherever, and that we can kind of, be on the catching the wave at the right time instead of the last ones to say, why didn't anybody tell me about such and such? So give us a few names and some of their varietals and why you think they're special.
Absolutely. So you're right. I love the Santa Cruz Mountains, and it's not just because it's our local area and I'm friends with a lot of the growers and winemakers in the area, but because I really love the wines. And as we spoke earlier, especially a transparent grape like Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, which is a lot of what is grown here, it can do so much in a winemaker's hand, really show off their style and the terroir of where they're growing. And the Santa Cruz Mountains is a perfect exemplar for that, because there's so many microclimates. I mean, if you've spent any time out hiking or driving, you can be in one place and be in full sun. You can take 5 steps to the right and be in freezing shade.
And it's sweater weather, yeah.
Absolutely. And so there are just so many great wines out there. And for me also, being young, there are a lot of great young winemakers that are doing interesting things out here. So some of my personal favorites, there are classics like Ridge and Mount Eden. Huge fan of both of those wineries. I think they make incredible wine. I'm a wine club member at both places. Like, personally, I love their wines. And there are lots of cool young upstart winemakers too, like Keegan Mayo at Assiduous Wines. There's somebody that, I worked with Keegan at Testarossa. There's somebody that I've been really championing the wines of for a long time, and he's starting to get some major press and some massive scores. People are starting to find out about him.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to give a shout out to somebody that I know a couple of Tim and Peggy Volkman, who were the owners of Volkman Estates Wines, and Keegan's Assiduous Pinot Noir from their vineyards just got I think a 96
points from Matt Kettman, San Jose local, which is not any bias or favoritism, but yeah, that's great. But anyway, sorry I interrupted. But so I love what Keegan's doing. I mean, he's making Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Malbec, Merlot, Cabernet. They're all stunning. I think like the Madsen wines, winemaker Cole, they're making incredible Chardonnays, Pinots, and Syrahs. James Jelks at Flores Wines is making incredibly interesting, totally natural wines, skin contact Chardonnays, and strange pet nat sparkling wines that are all just so delicious and interesting and unique. So, I mean, those are some of the ones that I'm really loving right now. I mean, I think also, of course, Marty Mathis at Catherine Kennedy is making world-class wines, some of the best Cabernets in the entire world.
He goes way back.
And also doing some interesting stuff now, too. You know, he planted some Albarino on his property. It's a little pergola out in front of the vineyard. You can see if you drive on Pierce Road. So he's doing something different there. That wine's great. We're just about to get the new vintage of that in. I love what Richard and Ryan Alfaro are doing at the Alfaro estate in Corralitos. You know, they make Chardonnay Pinot Noir, but they also make Gruner Veltliner. Ryan has recently started his own small brand. I believe it's called It's either Home Ranch or Home Farms. I can't remember off the top of my head. Amazing wines. And I'm always finding new wineries. You know, people are always saying, "Oh, have you heard of this?" Like, no, I haven't heard of it. Let's taste it.
And I think we share a common experience when you talk to these people whose names you've mentioned, and if you're lucky enough to go to their winery, these are so humble people. They're really proud of their work, but they're very humble.
Yeah,
and they're so passionate. They're so passionate, and they just, their eyes light up when you start asking them, "Well, tell me about your wine." And their commitment and stewardship to the land is good as well.
Yeah, I think, and that's one of the big things that we have here too, is many of the young winemakers and winemakers in general, they're really tied to the vineyards that they make wine from, even if they don't own those vineyards, and there are lots of privately owned vineyards like the Volkman Vineyard. However, many of these winemakers, because Santa Cruz is such a tough and interesting place to grow fruit, and every site is so different, they really take a vested interest in the vineyards and the farming and how things are picked.
It's a great relationship.
Exactly, and I think that symbiosis is really producing some incredible wines.
Well, good. Thank you for those recommendations. Well, last topic before we close out. Here we are in Los Gatos. Great spot, the base of the Santa Cruz Mountains AVA. How are we doing in what I'm going to call, is this a wine lover's paradise? How are we doing in wine bars? How are we doing in restaurants? Is the food and wine pairings good, or should we kind of change it up here, and or we make progress, or how's it going real quick? What's your uptake?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've been selling wine here in Los Gatos since 2010, so 13 years now, and I think Los Gatos is an incredible place to sell wine and to learn about wine. I think the Santa Cruz Mountains is a difficult appellation to learn about as a wine lover, and especially to go visit the wineries. It's not like going to Napa where you could go down 29, hit a bunch of wineries, get a tour bus, do all this kind of stuff. Some of these wineries in the Santa Cruz Mountains are tough to get to. They're up mountain roads, they're isolated, you can't get to more than one or two just due to space, let alone having to drive down the mountains after tasting and whatnot. So it is kind of a hard region to get to know. And the other thing to know about the Santa Cruz Mountains appellation is it goes from as far north as Half Moon Bay to as far south as Corralitos. So it's a
geographically it is a wide, narrow swath. Yeah.
Wildly large appellation. And so, I do think that Los Gatos and Santa Cruz both serve as kind of entry points into the wines of the region. So, here we have some great wine businesses and wonderful restaurants. I mean, everybody knows Los Gatos has got amazing restaurants and food, and I think the wine culture is there too. Santa Cruz has some really cool tasting rooms. The restaurant scene is a little rougher in Santa Cruz, but, Madsen recently opened a tasting room down there, and there's definitely a cool scene of small tasting rooms and winery facilities that's happening in Santa Cruz. But here in Los Gatos, I think for a town of our size, we definitely punch above our weight when it comes to wine. And everybody that I meet, restaurateurs, people that have bars, people, that are doing wine-specific businesses, they really do think about how wine is an integral part of what they're doing. And the other thing I really like about this area is that it's a little more casual with its approach to wine. We're so close to this wine business that there isn't that kind of uptight service, or, that you get in some places in Napa, these really high-end kind of cold service. We don't get that as much here.
Well, I will speak from personal experience, and I know it's on your website, but you make it come alive. One of your missions, as you stated, is to demystify wine, and you've got all the language. You can pronounce all the French, Spanish, whatever.
That's going a little far. I don't know about the French.
But one of your greatest skills and attributes is to, when a customer walks into your store, you just kind of can engage them, and within a short period of time, you've asked the right questions and they've given truthful answers, and you can direct them to a wine or wines that are going to absolutely exceed their expectations from prior experiences they've had in the past. Okay?
Absolutely.
You're an excellent GPS guide here.
Yeah, and one of the first books I read about wine when I was getting started was really instrumental. It was called Fear of Wine, and the whole idea was basically, don't be scared of it. It's just grape juice, right? Wine can be so intimidating, and that's really what I've tried to foster, and what myself and my partners would try to be a casual place to be serious about wine. There's a lot to learn, there's a lot to know, but really it's just grape juice, and the whole point of it is it's supposed to taste good. So, the elitist atmosphere, the people that will only drink really expensive wines, or from superstar winemakers, all that, that's not what we're about. We're about exploring what the grape can do in the hands of skilled operators, skilled winemakers, and we love it. We've been doing it for our entire careers and haven't fallen out of love with it, and we just want to share that with other people. And I think, another benefit of Los Gatos is that I've just found that the people are so into it. They're so interesting. They're not stuck in their ways. People are so open to trying new things, and I think that's just a wonderful thing. It's great for my business. Hopefully it's great for them too.
Well, I think you open a lot of doors, and people, I won't know if they're afraid, but they're saying, oh, can't I just stick with that Napa Chard? I know it. And you say, well, try this from Sicily, or try this from Spain, try this from Chile or Argentina. And you say, what? And they do, and they come back and say, thank you, give me some more.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to eat the same meal every day, right? So why would you want to drink the same type of wine every day?
Variety is the spice of wine.
Amen.
Well, great. Well, listen, all this talk about wine and food, I think we should celebrate. Cheers. And or as we say, chin chin.
Yeah.
And it's in every language. So let's enjoy.